I must have been in high school when I read the Vice magazine issue of Saving South Sudan.
Okay.
And that was first how I got accustomed or acquainted with you and your work, and also just my fascination with, all sorts of fascinating different parts of the world. So thanks again for agreeing to chat with me.
Oh, no problem, no problem. So that was 2014, I think, that they published that.
Yeah,
And a little backstory is that when they first began Vice, they contacted me, and not when they began Vice, but when they began their video sort of travel thing on, yeah, I swear it was VH1, but it was or it was some video travel series. And they wanted me to get involved. And I was like, well, how much money you got? And they were like, well, we don't have any money. And I'm like, okay, wait, so you want me to do what I do now, but not make any money doing it for you, right? So that didn't quite work. But they used a lot of my, stories and coverage, and they were big fans of the book. And it wasn't until 2013 I started getting these phone calls from people that worked advice, and they're like, oh man, like, how do you get into Somalia? Or like, I got a guy stuck here, how do I get him out? And I'm like, what, why are you calling me? I have nothing to do with you. Well, I'm like, yeah, okay, I do know, but I mean, just because you're sending children to war zones doesn't mean that you need to drag me into it. And so I approached the head of the news division, and they had a magazine division. I mean, God, they had so many different divisions. And I said, why don't you let me show you how it's done? I mean, you got a bunch of child journalists, which is great, but you don't seem to understand that you actually gain some sort of level of knowledge over 10, 20, 30 years of doing this, which could keep
right.
them safe. And so I said, look, let me show you how it's done. So let me do a documentary for you about a war that's just breaking, and we'll do some exclusive stuff, and I'll write the entire magazine that explains the background and what I'm doing. And they're like, you can't do that. And I said, yeah, I can. So, and I can do it in like 2 to 4 weeks. So I went to South Sudan. I tracked down Riek Machar.
Yeah,
We filmed the White Rebels. My storyline was bringing the child soldier back to South Sudan. And one of the things that was not put in the documentary, which is a shame, is that Riek Machar had his father killed. You remember
yeah,
Mashak? Yeah, well,
yeah,
Riek Machar had his father killed. And there's a lot of PTSD and everything in there, but I thought it was a really nice way to show how a young guy wants to get involved and the reality of what's going on there. And then you learn a lot. And then in the magazine, you learned the whole history of Africa and that region. And then I did I did the Bergdahl, and I
yeah.
did a story on Eric Haroon, who was yet another Irish jihadi that I
Mhm.
had met, and a very sad story. And so they put all that stuff in for Pulitzers. I didn't win because it's Vice, but good stuff basically. And it was basically saying, look, this is how it works. You're an organization that focuses on young people who want to do something meaningful. So stick to your goddamn knitting, right? Don't try to go outside that bubble. And if you stay in that lane, there's lots of interesting stories. But
Yeah,
Vice was kind of a paper tiger at the time. They had a lot of fictional advertising revenue numbers, and they were the drug for all the old media companies who wanted to be hip. And it turned out to be just a big bubble, right? The whole thing just went boop. So that's Vice. But it's a great idea.
yeah. I remember this the Saving South Sudan issue. It was a compelling narrative to bring. It was Mashat, right?
Yeah.
Mashat Latiep. Yeah, to
Yep.
bring Mashat, a former Lost Boy, back into the bush with the premise of saving his own country, teetering on the brink of being a failed state, just got independence. I thought it was a really compelling narrative, and
Right.
again, as you said, told against the backdrop of just the wider history of Africa. I
Right.
think it would
And
be a
by the
good
way, doing
maybe
it in
go
real
ahead.
time with the important thing is doing it on my schedule in real time without a bunch of NGOs trying to help you and shape the narrative. I mean, just doing real journalism, like nothing linked to some larger message that they wanted to get across. And I think that's the key.
Are you still in touch with Tim Freccia?
I haven't talked to him in a while. Like, he's up in upstate New York, I think, and he's always got some harebrained idea, like a coffee shop, motorcycle, whatever. So I'm assuming you could contact him.
Yeah, I was just curious. So let's actually maybe we'll start then with Africa. I remember I had heard you once in an interview discussing how I think it was maybe shortly after the Saving South Sudan issue was first published, and you were talking about how Africa is going to be sort of fertile ground as the next hotspot for conflicts and various geopolitical tensions on the global theater.
Mhm.
Um, and so I wanted to see if you could sort of talk to me a little bit about what's happening now in the Sahel. It seems like the Sahel is now sort of the breeding grounds of sorts for a lot of actual Islamic militarism. I want to see if you share some insight on that.
Well, you need to back up. So labels are always clumsy, right? And I'll just say this. Um, Africa is a very interesting place because it has a lot of resources, but not a lot of infrastructure. So you have a lot of very wealthy individuals and you have some very poor people. And it's actually very easy to overthrow governments in Africa. You know, you just get five guys together and kick out the other five guys. And you're seeing that now. And the UAE's behind a lot of that, and Russia's helping them. Secondly, there's a lot of history. And when we say Africa, it's like saying North America. You know, it's hard to kind of lump in, you know, one continent. But the Sahel is actually just a very narrow strip. And it's a very funny strip because it's sort of the barrier between the north of Africa and the center of Africa. And in that region, it looks like sand, right? It looks like there's nothing there, but that's not true. It's been traveled for thousands of years, and it's sort of an Arab African, you know, freeway of trade, and also now, you know, artisanal mines, everything from uranium to gold to diamonds to whatever. And if you go back and study Timbuktu, you know, there was the very rich gold southern central part of Africa, and they would all travel up to Timbuktu to keep the Arabs out of their business. Then the Arabs would use these very clearly delineated trade routes because of the oases, right? The water. And they would bring that stuff into the Middle East and Europe. So when you talk about terrorists, you're really talking about people who are trying to control these routes and these resources. And, you know, it's a trick after 9/11, and maybe even before that, to label an Islamic group as somehow linked to terrorism, and then skip over people like, let's say, like Wagner or Joseph Kony, and but all these
Yeah.
people do the same thing. They protect the routes, they protect the mines. And just a little funny story is, you know, I've been tracking Kony since the mid '90s, and you know, I relocated him about 6 months ago. I talked to a friend who runs a militia in Chad, and he says, yeah, we're going to sign some deal with Kony because we're fighting with Al Qaeda and Kony against Wagner, who the UAE is paying to take over all these artisanal mines. Now, an artisanal mine is literally a hole in the ground, you know, with
Yeah.
maybe 50 workers, maybe a couple of guys with AKs. You know, it's not really a fortified area. They rely on secrecy, just like they did 2,000 years ago. And they hammer out these little bits of gold flake and whatever, and they gather it up and they take it to the market in West Africa, or they fly in a jet and they take it straight to Dubai, where they convert it into cash. So Wagner is roaming around trying to grab these mines, and Kony and what we call Al Qaeda or ADF is linked up with militias who get paid money by the mine owners to fight off the mercenaries. So you can see the mix, right?
Mm.
But you can also see the potential for an incredible story. You know, there's I don't think anybody's ever written that story. When I told the militia guy that there was $5 million as a reward, he stupidly told the Russians that, and the Russians ambushed Kony, and he poofed it off into the bush again. That was about 2 months ago. So the point is what journalism is supposed to do is go into these places where nobody wants to go, where nobody's paying attention, and restructure, you know, what's going on the ground. And that's why it's so interesting to see something, let's say, like the White Army,
Yeah.
Mashar, and you're seeing how, okay, wait. So I read the news about a government and a vice president, but yet this guy is summoning dark spirits and mobilizing kids to go kill soldiers who run away because they're terrified of being slaughtered, which, you know, quite rightly. But it's really over this port, which controls the barge traffic and the oil regions. And that's what Mashad always did, is take over the oil regions. So that's a very long answer to your question. But what makes the Sahel interesting is that that same mechanism is in play, right? And the US is, they're looking for terrorists. They've been replaced by the Russians, who don't give a shit about terrorists. They give a shit about controlling access to resources. And gold is very important to Russia because of the sanctions, of course.
On that topic of this idea of terrorism, how do you interpret sort of Netanyahu's bombardment on Gaza that a lot of activists are calling a genocide, which there seems to be a strong basis in saying that. It seems to some extent that he's pulling a playbook out of the Bush-Cheney thing and using this idea of Islamic terrorism to garner support and benefactors for the war. What's your interpretation of the actual motivations behind the war?
Well, first of all, you have to look at Netanyahu. Netanyahu's father was not only a Zionist, he was an ultra-Zionist. And there's a big difference between somebody who's, let's say, Jewish and a Zionist.
Yeah,
Zionism is a European colonial idea that began in England and in Europe. And it was the idea of like, okay, Europe doesn't like Jews because they're like gypsies, right? There's an ethnic conflict here. We're diaspora. Let's give us a homeland. And after World War II, nobody wanted Jewish migrants, just like today with African migrants, right? And they all came from Eastern Europe. I mean, not all, but most of them came from Europe and Eastern Europe, and they were looking to relocate out of Europe. America didn't want, these migrants, and nobody wanted these migrants. So they used what had been created in the Balfour Declaration about, a Palestinian homeland or a Middle Eastern homeland to basically say, look, just send all the refugees there, all the migrants there. And with the proviso, the Rothschilds were helping with, but that you don't disturb the people that are there. There's a lot of land, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing the Zionists did was start kicking out the Arabs and then created a terrorist organization, which was linked to the political party that Netanyahu's father was part of. So you start there, and then you realize, okay, there's a greater vision for a Zionist Middle East. And this is not a Jewish Middle East. You talk to a lot of Jewish people and they'll say, well, why should we link our religion to a specific piece of real estate, particularly if somebody's living on it, right? It creates a very negative view of a religion, which is actually a very pacifist religion. So Netanyahu has skillfully, you can pretty much call him American. He went to school, I think, in Philadelphia, has cultivated American Zionists, foreign Zionists who have funded his political campaigns, amongst them Jared Kushner, who then create a very strong political mechanism in America, which we call IPAC, right? And this is the ultimate foreign meddling in our elections because they are not taking money from Israel and putting it in the pockets of politicians. They're basically directing wealthy Zionists to send money to those campaigns. And you've seen that recently. So it's important to understand that is that there's a political war inside the US by people who want to create sort of this greater vision of a homeland. That homeland is quite extensive, and it includes Gaza and it includes the West Bank, and it has no mercy or any kind of provision for a Palestinian homeland. The reason for that is when you vote, if you simply said, look, all of Gaza, all the West Bank is going to be part of Israel, the Palestinians would outnumber the Israelis. And therefore, if they voted in a leader, he would be most likely an Arab and most likely, favorable to the Arab view of that region. So they have to do this horrible thing, which is how do we make these people seem so vile and so disposable that we're allowed to kill them in large numbers? And, we know where this comes from. It comes from Germany in the Holocaust, where all the problems of Germany in the 30s were blamed on Jews and this, conspiracy and whatever. And as Americans, we are 180 degrees opposed to that basic idea of saying those ethnic group, that religion are terrible people, and let's go kill them until they're all gone, and then our problems will be solved. So when I see 80, 60, 50 people getting murdered, I mean, they have round numbers now. They don't even bother doing the specific counts. You can see an organized, lengthy pogrom, the same technique that was applied to the Jews in Germany. First of all, contain them in a small area, and then create reasons to go in and do violence to them, and then hope at some point they all flee and they all end up in some other place. And this is the tactic. By the way, you can see drawings of the future Gaza put together by the Likud party, and it's a beautiful sort of Dubai place with freeways and resorts and office buildings, but there's no Palestinians in there. So Right now, Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing very hard to fulfill a fantasy, but he's missing one critical part, which is he needed an escape valve for the Palestinians to escape to, right?
Yeah.
So originally that was going to be Jordan. That didn't work. And then it was supposed to be Egypt, and Egypt said, no way, pal. And they built a giant wall. So now he's got a problem. So he keeps murdering Palestinians under the guise of chasing Hamas.
Why is it that you think that it's such a hot button inflammatory issue to talk about specifically in the US? And what I mean is let's look in the world of from a more right-wing media lens. There's this it's never a question, generally speaking, within the right-wing media sphere that we should ever cut off funding or try to put the clamp down, put the brakes on Israel and being the US government as a benefactor. Whereas when it comes to Ukraine, people are, talking about Ukraine corruption and then saying that that's the reason why we should stop supporting Ukraine. Why do you think that there's that strange
Well, first
dichotomy
of
there?
all, how old are you?
24,
24. So what year were you born?
2000.
All right. So people my age view Israel as a scrappy little survivor, fighting against this giant Arab. You remember the Six-Day War, Yom
Mm,
Kippur, all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Um, there was a transition from being a terrorist state that was basically abusing locals to this sort of militant state that was fighting against all odds against all of its Arab neighbors, right? And in that agreement, America said, look, you're the only democracy in the Middle East, which at that time was sort of true. It's not true anymore. But so we began this process of giving them money. And every time they started a war, we would give their enemies money, right? You remember the peace deals in which Egypt and Israel got money. Now, that money is not money. That money goes, I don't know, about 50% goes right back into American companies. And this is the trick. What we call foreign aid is not foreign aid. It's actually domestic aid laundered through foreign countries, whether it's Colombia or Israel or Egypt. So they're basically buying our equipment. They're using our specifications, and they're buying stuff from us. So this is where the idea of aid came in. Secondly, Netanyahu is going to prison at some point if he doesn't have a war. He got caught up in some fairly major scandals and bribery and things like that. And you got to remember, Israel's a normal place. It's full of normal people, intelligent people. They have a court system. They don't tolerate criminality, et cetera, et cetera. So what you're seeing now is a sort of right-wing Frankenstein that's taken over Israel. And one of the reasons that they needed Hamas was when they did the last peace deal, the mid-2000s, they agreed to put in a government called Fatah, which was run by a guy named Mohammed Dahlan. And Mohammed Dahlan worked for Israel, worked for America, and he was a Palestinian, but he set up a security apparatus that made Gaza sort of transparent to Israel and all these people so they kept a lid on it, right? Palestinians didn't like that. They don't like to be treated that way. And it was basically a large concentration camp. So what happened is, I'm trying to think of the exact years, 2006, 2008, something like that. They held an election, and the Palestinians got rid of Fatah and brought in Hamas, which is a very radical Islamic group, sponsored by Muslim Brotherhood, but basically very nationalistic, right? Like, screw this being a nice guy, we want this. Now, you got to remember that when these guys go to the peace deal, like Yasser Arafat and stuff like that, these people steal all that money. I mean, it's stolen in large amounts. Yasser Arafat was an incredibly wealthy man who diverted, most of these funds that were supposed to go to developing Palestine into his own business investments through Egypt. And Dahlan did the same thing. And Palestinians see that. They know that these leaders are living the life of Riley and they're still suffering. So there's anger. So Hamas came in, which reflected the anger of the Palestinians, and they began fighting back. Now, it is crystal clear that Netanyahu needs Hamas to drive a wedge between the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority,
Yeah.
and Gaza and Israelis, so that at very key moments, this anger bubbles up into either the Intifada or the October 7th attacks. And then he uses that as a tool to basically kill as many, flatten as many, destroy as many, Palestinian elements as he can. and then they start all over again. And the reward is that they're usually paid a lot of money to shut up and stop fighting. But in this case, he's at the tail end of his career. He's kind of like a Donald Trump. And he's pushing as hard as he can, and he's formed a union with the right wing. So you're of the generation that wakes up and goes, hey, that's not fair. Israel, you're a bully. You're not like a little guy fighting, you're not David fighting Goliath. You're Goliath stomping on millions of Davids. And this is not right. And you can see the split between the government of the United States, who was basically paid to say, support Israel no matter what, and normal and young people who are saying, that's terrible. I want nothing to do with that. And again, you're similarly, look at Ukraine. Yeah, it's the exact same thing, right? Brutality dished out on people, civilians, false claims of terrorism, false claims of ownership of land, false historical references which mean nothing. And again, if you start with a clean piece of paper, which we never will, you would say that's not fair. That's not right. Gaza needs a homeland. We're Americans. We know exactly what happens when you deprive people of their liberty. But I used to tell this joke when in the 90s, okay? So in the 90s and the 2000s, I always included Israel in my book, right? It was clear to me that Israel was at war in a very permanent sense, but you could also take vacations there. So I would make presentations about the world's most dangerous places, and there's always somebody in the back saying, why do you put Israel in there? And I said, because it's a war zone and it's dangerous. And then another guy was like, yeah. And then the fight would start in the audience between these two people. I would say nothing. And these people start yelling at each other and almost coming to blows. And this happened over and over and over again. And what I think I resented most was the zeal, Hamas means zeal, in which Israelis would project the idea that they have a right to defend themselves. Israel has a right to exist. And I'm like, but that also works for Gaza. If you're going to say that about you, then these people should have the same rights. It's as simple as that. And they've managed to negate that. So
What do you think the broader ripple effects might be? I, for one, am having a hard time telegraphing how exactly this might play out. Iran seems to be sort of holding back, and they've done a few virtue signaling responses in the last couple of months. What do you sort of prophesize as the potential wider geopolitical results of this?
okay, well, first of all, never be a prophet, because they always get crucified, right? But when you look at the geopolitical situation in the Middle East, you're talking about people that have been playing this game for 4,000 years, right? And it extends into two forms. One is mass murder of entire populations and erasing of culture, or just getting along and celebrating diversity and blah, 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 right? So, I mean, there's the two spectrums, and they're very extreme. When you fast forward a history map of what we would call the Middle East, and you include a little bit of Asia Minor, and you see it changes very rapidly. Whether you start with the Phoenicians or the Egyptians or whatever it is, it's like that place, the ethnicities, the tribalism has its flowering and then it's failing, right? And you see that people are fighting continually over the same dirt over and over and over and over and over and over, under the guise of preserving tribalism or religion. So it's clearly a formula that doesn't work. It's, if I say, look, I'm Canadian, I'm going to kill you because you're from Chicago, how is that going to fix or make anything better, right? So the idea of imposing biblical standards on real estate is ludicrous. Secondly, the idea that somebody has to survive because it's their homeland can easily be deleted in any argument by saying, yeah, but let's look at how many people sat on that same piece of ground and how many names it had and how much blood was spilt over that, even down to the guy living next to the guy who throws rocks at him because, he's got 1 foot over on his property line or whatever. So, and one of the very first things, and this is probably a lesson for everyone, one of the very first laws in the world was created by Hammurabi. And it was about real estate. It was about when you own a piece of property, measure it, write it down, and on your cuneiform, that's your property. And when you sell it, create another document and pass it to that. Now, the entire Middle East has that process, believe it or not. You can go back and look at the ownership of any plot of land, going back to 3000 BC. So it's inexcusable that they keep pretending like this is mine. No, this is mine. This is yours. No, this is, you know. So when you look at Iran, Iran is a complex mix of many, many ethnicities, right? And it came from a great empire. But within that empire, every form of ethnicity and religion and whatever. So it doesn't suit them to start a war in which their resources would get degraded so low that these people would then start breaking off, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, the myth of Iran is used specifically by Israel, specifically by right wings in America, to create wars that don't need to be fought. You know, you could leave today and visit Iran, travel all around, talk to people, you know, form your own opinion, come back and say, okay, I don't like this about Iran and I like this about Iran. But it's extremely doubtful that Iran is going to invade anybody at any time. We look at Hezbollah, right? Hezbollah militias formed to act as a barrier and to contain Israel. Israel knows that every time they grab that tar baby, it's like fucking a hedgehog. You know, it hurts a lot, and then it feels a whole lot better when they stop, right? So that's what Hezbollah is, just there to die and scream a lot and make life miserable for Israelis. So there's no reason for them to attack Lebanon, all these places. But their regional containment is now focused on destroying Gaza and the West Bank, which is terrible because it's a crime. It's been judged as a crime, and Netanyahu's been judged as a criminal. So I don't think he should be allowed to operate, or any nation should be allowed to operate outside the norms of legality. Because why don't I come over to your house and take your house and kill your family and rape your dog and say that it's mine? Because in the Bible, or whatever I believe in, that's my place and you can't have it. And so anyway, my point is that it's a serious flaw in American foreign policy to maintain the same rigid support of a government, not the people, right? Of a government that is clearly murdering people and breaking international laws, which will bite us in the ass, right? At some point.
I want to talk now. I think this is a good segue. You had mentioned somewhere in there Jared Kushner. And I had heard you on a podcast a little while back talking about an upcoming documentary that you're making about Jared Kushner and
Right.
sort of this slush pile of
Slush
funds
fund.
with, yeah. Can you talk to, I mean, I know you want to stay tight-lipped on the documentary itself, but can you talk
Well,
to
I
me
can't
about the
reveal the
premise?
contents, but I can tell you the general drift.
Yeah.
So during the Trump administration, you had a lot of people who needed money real bad, including Donald Trump, including Jared Kushner. These were guys that had been, you know, skipping like frogs from debt to debt, from loan to loan, and they needed a solution pretty fast. And when you go into the White House, there's a lot of checks and balances. There's a lot of legal restrictions against doing business, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of just protocol. And what happened is that Donald Trump had been coached by a bunch of friends of mine who used to work with Flynn about deep state, how they were going to come get you and overthrow you and hack your phone and do all this kind of stuff. And Donald Trump went in very paranoid and hired his kids, Ivanka and Jared, to be senior advisors. And now a senior advisor position sounds good, but you don't get a budget, right? I'm sure you could have a staff if you want to, but Jared became sort of the guy outside the Oval Office. So if you needed to get in to talk to Donnie about something, you kind of went through Jared. And he very quickly figured out that there are some foreign nations that want to spend a serious amount of cash to get the president's attention on some issues that maybe the president's not paying attention to, among them Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the UAE. So Trump made the mistake of hiring very competent people around him. And each one of those people has a portfolio and they have a budget and they have responsibilities. So if you run the Pentagon, you're in charge of, you know, the military. If you're the State Department, you're in charge of foreign policy. Jared Kushner thought, well, you know, if I can cut these guys off at the pass, I can work some deals. But the problem was that Jared Kushner didn't have any money. So these Abraham Accords were sort of hatched. And they were hatched out of the idea that KSA, well, specifically MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, MBZ, Mohammed bin Salman, and I'll say Russia and Israel because they're sort of in the same boat, but Russia was not as aggressive on some of the tasks that they wanted Jared to do. But what they wanted was to roll back Arab Spring. You know, they've been ignored by Obama. Obama supported Arab Spring, wanted to get rid of these dictators. Why should one family control all the wealth that comes out of the ground, right?
Yeah.
And the UAE had begun in 2013 rolling back these governments with Morsi. You remember they overthrew him and put in Sisi. And now Sisi was their like little golden-haired child, and this is why 10 million magically landed in Donald Trump's lap just after the election to show that Sisi's the guy you got to pay attention to. They wanted to overthrow a number of countries, Jordan, Libya, create a sort of 11 nation alignment to replace excuse me, I'm just coming off of a head cold, replace the GCC and form an anti-Iran alliance with Israel. And the reason for that was very simple, is that Israel gets the best weapons and Saudi Arabia and UAE get second banana, and they wanted to launch a war in Yemen, and they weren't getting the weapons they wanted, right? So back in 2013, as they were preparing for this war, they came up with a deal that we'll work with Israel and we'll form this alliance and we'll go kick the shit out of the Muslim Brotherhood related nations, which included Qatar, Turkey. I mean, it's a big list, right? And Jared bought into this, but the military didn't. Rex Tillerson didn't buy into it. You know, he was the Secretary of State at that time. And Jared began doing diplomacy, sort of freelance diplomacy, meeting with, at that time, MBS was, I think, the head of defense for Saudis. And he was about to take power in a coup as well. And Jared essentially said, I need money. If you want me to do all these things, if you want me to, you know, reshape the Middle East, I need some wasta. Nobody knows me from Adam, and I don't need money. So they created a fund for him. It was supposed to be 2 billion, but you know, he got a hold of $1 billion and he started hiring people. And I can't tell you who he hired, but when you find out, your mind will be blown. He started hiring people, start overthrowing countries, you know, beginning with Jordan and then Qatar and then Libya, Jordan again, Libya, in order to reshape the Middle East. And part of overthrowing Jordan was to create a Palestinian homeland under a guy named Faisal, who's the king's younger brother. And they all failed. They all failed for a very good reason, is that they hired a guy who didn't know what he was doing, but they paid him a lot of money. And that suddenly created a problem. So now the Abraham Accords was supposed to have a second state in Jordan. It didn't. They couldn't convince Sisi to create sort of the Sinai, which is a wasteland, but you know, create the Sinai as a homeland for Gaza, or Palestinians. He already had his problems with we call, you know, ISIS in the Sinai, right? So he already had a terrorism problem in that region. He didn't want, you know, a few million Gaza stirring the pot. So anyway, the bottom line is it all fell apart. Abraham, of course, don't make any sense. And the Palestinians tell Jared Kushner to go fuck himself because he thinks it's a real estate deal, which then leads to October 7th. So that's an interesting story.
I'm really looking forward. And when, I mean, you didn't mention when the release date is, but any idea?
Well, first of all, I have to film these interviews. I have to travel to all these places and I have to put it together. So funding is a big part of this. You know, funding, you know, documentaries are expensive, right? And I shoot, you know, 4K, 6K, you know, cinematic quality documentary. It's not like the old days where I just have like a handheld camera and put it up on Discovery. There's also some legal issues because these people, once they're discovered, are going to go, holy shit, how does he know that, right? And you know, I've been working with the FBI and the DOJ. They know these things happen. They don't have the pieces, right? And so I said, here's the damn pieces. Here's the documents. Here's the things. I worked with the UN for 2 years to create a report, right, on the what they call the Opus project, which was the Libya part of this thing. So it's big. I mean, it's vast, right? And hundreds of millions of dollars. Everybody knows I'm dogging them and they don't want to talk to me because they know exactly what I'm going to ask them. So I got a guy from the Iran-Contra days hiding out in the Dominican Republic who knows exactly why I'm looking for him, who says, no, I don't want to talk to Robert. I got people that are going to be indicted because there's grand juries out right now. And once they're indicted, then I can sort of bring them in. So the timing is also critical.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just sent a book proposal out to 19 publishers and they all said, fuck me. Like, you're going to need a committed publisher to do this. And what that means is they're going to spend millions of dollars because you're talking about the wealthiest people on earth doing fucked up things.
Yeah.
And lawfare is real, like litigation, assassination, all this stuff's real. And they're just waiting for, if Trump comes back in power, they'll just start all over again, right? They'll just pick up where they left off.
So I guess we'll wait and see about the documentary, but that does lead me to something that I've been excited to talk to you about. Obviously, I mentioned that I first got acquainted with your work with the Saving South Sudan issue in Vice
Right.
magazine, former, the late great Vice magazine.
Mhm.
I've then, followed a lot of your other work, but one of the things I follow you on is Twitter, or now
Yeah.
X, and you're not shy about your opinions about the MAGA phenomena. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about would be MAGA as just sort of a loose set of political and social ideas. Does it mirror any other sort of political phenomena that you've seen elsewhere in the world, or is it sort of its own animal?
No, it's a very common side effect. There's two things going on. One is, in order to attract these kind of people, you used to have tent revivals, right? You used to have snake oil salesmen roll up and go to the right parts of town and sell you snake oil at 5 cents a bottle. You had people selling you salvation, straight ticket to heaven. There are a type of profile, there is a type of profile in all levels of society that doesn't understand things but believes and trusts people, which is fine, right? This is how people join the army. This is how you get schooled. This is how you go to church and you listen to a preach. I mean, there are people that know more than you do, right? And these people tend to realize, okay, I don't have the capability to do comparative religious studies, but I believe this guy and he puts on a good show and I'll believe him. Just like this guy that says, hey, you want to make money in real estate, send me $20. Or do you want to lose weight? Send me $5 and I'll show you how I lost weight. Or my favorite one is how to get rich quick. It's, well, how do you do that? Well, you just run ads that say, get rich quick, and they send you money. Like, it's literally like the oldest scam in the world. So there's a group of people like that. Secondly, there is a mood in America and in much of the world of fear. A lot of that is based on 20 years of seeing dead people and bombs dropping and terrorists, and part of it's COVID, some of it's economic, but usually large groups of people who are not sophisticated or uneducated were not exposed to the intensity that social media provides. And what I mean by that is, if I'm just a guy and I do my job and I work in a mine and I come home, I just want to watch TV for a couple of hours, have a beer, and then sleep, get up, do it again, whatever. I'm not into politics, right? I'm angry because I didn't get the things I thought I was going to get. I don't get paid enough. Things cost too much, blah, blah, blah. But that's a very real segment of society. Inside that, though, is a very strange science. And it's the same science that Hitler used. It's the same science that cults use. It's the same science that tricksters and con men use. And that is to excite your sense of optimism by using fear and lies, right? So I don't know. I did a presentation once for a doctor and his backers who were selling weight loss products, and it was a milkshake, right? And came in 3 flavors, basically sawdust. You mix it up, you drink it, and you lose weight. It's nothing unusual or weird. And as a marketing guy, I talked to the owners and they said, well, this doctor is a young, good looking guy, gets these women all fired up, gets them all moist. They're going to lose weight. They're kind of chubby. They're just like, I want to look like I did back when I was 25. And he sells them a promise. And they buy into that promise. And they buy it with such vigor that it becomes almost a religion. And then they become preaching it to their friends, right? And they all lose weight in the first month. They all religiously follow the routine and they show results. And then that's pyramid marketing, right? And we're all familiar with that. And this is what MAGA does. MAGA promises you some miracle, whether it's a better country or make more money or less people yelling at you about things you don't understand. They find other people who share that enthusiasm. They communicate similar narratives and ideas and hopes. And they have it constantly reinforced by social media. And this is where Donald Trump knows his game. He knows just like with Kim Kardashian or Coca-Cola, if you keep hitting that button, bing, 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 people think this is the thing, right? I'm part of that. I'm part of the. Now, when Steve Bannon goes to jail and Donald Trump's hiding at Mar-a-Lago, they get very fucking nervous. I mean, really nervous, because their cult leader is not directing them to react to a threat. In this case, let's say Harris and Waltz. You can see now the cult is starting to crumble. There isn't that same sense of energy and power. And it's fascinating to see Donald Trump retreat into his little gilded home and literally be confused by what he's seeing on TV, which you think about Jim Jones, right? You think about any cult leader, he's losing the plot. He's not providing hope to people. He's just angry and he's scared of things he sees because he can't understand them and he's communicating them incorrectly. So MAGA is a cult. MAGA is no different than the ghost dancers when the Indians were dying out. It's no different than what Jim Jones assembled down in Guyana. I mean, it's a group of people that believe in something that's not true. And they all rely on self-reinforcement, constant, stimulation. And they're all getting grifted. This is the funny thing, is that there's a monetary underpinning to this, right? Like Scientology, where you have to keep giving money to this thing, right? So these are the key elements of cult thinking. And by the way, I've seen this in Africa. You talk about the documentary you saw. I see it everywhere, and it's very easy to evoke.
How do you think, as a society, what are some defenses against that?
Education. It's not rocket science. You have to foster the skill or the science of knowledge, self-generated knowledge. And God, are we in the fucking golden era of free knowledge, right? I mean, this is the thing. You remember when I first wrote the world's most dangerous places, when I wrote it back in 1993, began to write it, there was no internet. I mean, there may have been somewhere where you could probably go on to a computer like Mosaic, but I couldn't just type in how much does a cab cost, in Cairo. Like now, all that information is there. If I want to learn about a rebel group, I'm pretty sure they've got a website and they've got a click button, and God, I sent my friends off to meet some rebels in Irian Jaya, and there's their website, there's the information guy, so I began to put together a book that required physically traveling and talking to people and and asking them questions. And I came back with a very nuanced view of the world. I mean, a funny view of the world, because I'm just always surprised at how fucking stupid people are sometimes. But things aren't that much different on the other side of the world. People still think the same way. They worry about eating. They worry about taking a crap. They worry about their kids. They worry about money, And you can always build a bridge to those people unless they're part of a cult, unless they've been told, no, white guy bad, this is bad, black guy bad, or whatever. And this is the thing that bothers me, that in an era of absolute access to knowledge, we have stupid fucking cults driving our politics. And we're talking about America now, right? We're not talking about Central Africa or remote Asia. I mean, we're talking about the wealthiest country on earth, where we all have access to many things, and we still have these fucking troglodytes telling us things that just aren't true.
Even I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of these right-wing ideologues. I saw a tweet of yours about, that made me laugh, about Joe Rogan. But, people sort of within that media ecosystem on his side of things, the Jordan Petersons, the Ben Shapiros, and those type.
Right.
Why have those guys, you think, captured the brains of young men specifically? It just seems like there could be better role models.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that interest me. One is young males, when they develop pubic hair and hormones and they start wondering about themselves as an individual, not as a family member, are forced into a world that's not really taught to them. And that is that women look at men differently when you are able to breed, right? It's a funny thing to say, but it's true. And every society used to have a coming of age process that would take a young boy into a man, whether he's killed the lion, or whether he wandered in the desert for 40 days, or whether he had to memorize the entire Quran, or whatever. There was always this process in which a young man would test himself and then prove to others that he was capable of being an adult. And then he would go on the hunt or whatever. And this is a healthy thing. This is something that I think in humans is very interesting. It's like when you see a puppy with its mother, and you think, when does that puppy know to wander off and be its own person, right? When does the buffalo leave the herd and go off and start looking for a mate, right? Now, I may sound crazy when I say this, but that thing is missing from society today. We have created a cocoon in which a coddled child, someone who's fed and housed and has his room with his, speed racer blankets or whatever, can actually grow up into a teen, still wear his hat backwards, still play video games, still not worry too much about financial stress. Excuse me. And cope with some of the most brutal fucking shit you've ever seen in your life, right? I mean, and it doesn't bode well, because then they form opinions based on what they select as their role models or mentors. Let me get a thing of water, because I got a cough here. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries.
So the reason you test young men is because they make bad decisions because of testosterone, right? They tend to think that they're immortal and all powerful. And that process, whether it's, joining the Marine Corps, Special Forces, whatever, interning, becoming an apprentice, was created to say, hey, you got smarts, you got skills, but just pay attention, because if you do that, that won't work out very well. So young men seek answers, right? The funny thing is YouTube. Anybody I work with is like, when we pose with a technical problem or whatever, we'll go on YouTube and go, and then there's a guy going, oh, let me tell you all about the conflict in Russia. Let me tell you about how to edit on Final Cut Pro. Let me tell you how to lose 10 pounds. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure that somewhere on YouTube, there's a guy that actually knows what he's doing, but he's probably not on YouTube telling you that answer. He's probably doing it for a living and getting paid a lot of money for it, And Jordan Peterson is a psychiatric counselor. Like, he's not this he deals with fucked up people. And his job is to let them see what is inhibiting them, what's stopping them from developing or whatever. But you don't get a certificate. I mean, he just tells you standard psychiatric practice. And he began to develop this really weird following of young men who just couldn't deal with what masculinity is, what what's it called, failure to launch kind of stuff. And then he began endorsing the kind of things that you shouldn't endorse. And I don't pay a lot of attention to Jordan Peterson. He's an intelligent man. He's a fantastic use of language and pacing. He's a good speaker. Reminds me of Marshall McLuhan, of all people. And people find comfort in that. Now, Joe Rogan, he's actually a little skinny guy, right? Like, Joe Rogan's a tiny guy, but he goes to the gym, blah, blah. And he's successful. And he's a smart guy. I like Joe Rogan, I don't necessarily say that he embraces the right wing, but he does dabble in pandering to right-wing ideas because it gets some viewers and advertisers. Who's that British guy? Russell Brand?
Yeah, he's a right-wing guy now.
Is total piece of shit turned into a prophet, right? And I love this idea. But I love the idea that, like, Alex Jones. Who the fuck is Alex Jones? Alex Jones has been on the radio and TV for 1 billion years, right? We used to have a guy named Wally George on the Access Radio, Access TV, who literally was the very first sort of neo-Nazi in Orange County, and he had like this white hair that you couldn't mess up, and they would chant all kinds of things. And my point is that these are not necessarily extreme views, but they're not normal views, right?
Yeah.
They're not loving, caring, sympathetic people. They're not teaching you the basic tools to be a father, to be a lover, to be a warrior. These are all very specific things that you need to learn from actual experts. And one of the things that's missing, and again, remember, social media is not reality, right? Social media is very Pavlovian. It's designed to stimulate, things in your eyes, your brain, your emotions, and it does it more than a crackhead snorts crack, right? So the bottom line is, let me just do something here. Hold on. No, I'm fine. Okay. So anyway, the bottom line is that the world of social media is not the same as the world, right? There's actual consequences in the world, and there aren't so many consequences in social media. And people tend to create false personas, right? And false personas are ones that look good on social media. Many of them fictional, right? Like, fake names, fake avatar, whatever.
Right.
And also tend to be hyper aggressive. If you've ever played video games or gone on chat lists and I used to have fun exposing people. So, I have a knife company, and a guy bought two of my knives, and turned out he was this Chinese guy. He was a nurse, and he had facial disfigurations, like I guess splotches or something like that. And so he had an account on this knife thing, and this one guy was insulting him. I'm just being rude all the time, and he was saying, "I love these knives, blah blah blah," and he's like, "Fuck you." Blah, blah, blah. So I kind of stuck my. I said, "Hi, I'm Robert Pelton. What's your name? Nice to meet you." And the guy's like, "Hey, fuck you, blah blah blah." Okay. About 2 hours later, "Hi, Bill. This is your house. This is where you work. You're using your computer at the office. You're married to this woman," and he just about shit himself, right? And I didn't realize at the time, because I think it's wrong to abuse people online, but suddenly this whole chat list erupted, just with because suddenly they realized that their false personas that they've been propagating could destroy them. And this guy particularly sold insurance. And he sold insurance with a corporate computer, and that was enough to get him fired. And so all these spammers and these trolls are like deeply weird people that hope you don't find out who they
Yeah.
are. Let me just, I'm going to swap something here.
No worries.
Just a quick battery check. I travel all over the world. I never get sick. I invite friends to my house. I get sick within 2 days. And I'm thinking, okay, I need to go back to COVID rules, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's allowed anywhere near me.
What's the matter with you? You have a chest cold or something? Sinus
No,
problem?
it's just the run of the mill, so about every month or so, these colds run around the world. In this case, it's just a throat thing.
Yeah.
It's just when I talk, it makes me cough. So it's not that I get paid to talk. But anyway, back to your question. So what I'm saying is that the issue of manhood, the transition from a child who's cared for to someone who cares for others, needs a sense of testing, right? Like self-confidence, how to actually conduct yourself in society, how to talk to people, how to talk to women, how to be honest, how to help people. I mean, just really simple, stupid, boring things. None of that exists, of course, in social media. Secondly, the issue of social media, which rewards insults, rewards sort of angry trolls, and sort of a sense of like, I'm on the upside of my bipolar medication, and look at me.
Yeah.
Look at the Tate brothers, for example, or just these sad little balding people from Luton. And it's like they have a prostitution business in which they lure women to do cams. And I'm like, how is this guy even on social media and not in jail, right? Donald Trump, longtime grifter,
Yeah.
has the rap down. And I'm saying that what's a man? Like, what's a woman? What's the thing you want in a man? It's not that. You want calmness, you want intelligence, you want hard work, you want honesty, you want a lot of things that are just boring as shit on the internet, right? So I think that's one problem. The second problem is that these philosophies of supremacy, a strong man picks people up, a strong man doesn't really seek people who are weaker than him, to abuse, right? It's like an ethos that blows my mind, that somehow you have to go to the gym and get muscles and whatever, because it's okay, fine. Don't go to the gym for 6 months. You look just the same you used to. But why not lift weights with your brain? Why not try to figure out things that benefit people. These are very rarely put forth on social media as role models for young people, right? So, your chosen career of journalism, I don't support the concept of witnessing anything. I don't support the concept of being a left-wing bleeding heart, like, oh, look, poor little baby's dying of starvation. Let me take a picture of that, I don't support the idea of just endlessly telling the same story and prevailing on people to do something about it when it's the same story they read every year about starvation, murder, war, whatever. It's try to break the paradigm, try to change the paradigm with tools that we have. And, I have to say that every story I've ever done, I've tried to put in a lesson or something that you go, never thought of that, right? And it's partly because I can't bring labels into a war, right? I can't do something in real life and try to put it into a box so that it's acceptable. And one of the sad things is that editors in publications, very few of them left, try to squeeze things into narratives that their readers are comfortable with. And I don't follow that at all. So, partly that's why I do my own thing. I don't wait for an editor to go, wait, you want to show terrorists as good people? How does that work, Robert? I said, well, let me tell the story and you make the decision at the end of the story, right? And whether it's John Walker Lind or whether it's the human brain teams or whatever, I try to say, look, this is what I asked. I asked fairly intelligent questions. This is what I saw. This is what they told me. And I think from this month or whatever that I spent here, I think you'll learn something that maybe you're not getting from somewhere else.
Another question I wanted to ask was, I think for me, being a young guy, looking out at I guess it's kind of twofold. One is obviously just your own existentialism as an individual, but then the world that you're existing in, I look out at the landscape and there just seems to be so many dumpster fires. Our own domestic political crises, chaos all around, the Middle East, tension bubbling, Africa. Do you
Well, that's a
feel
disease.
more do you feel more hopeful about the future? And how do you sort of deal with the continuously burning dumpster fire that the world often seems to be?
Well, let's get something straight. Nobody came to you and said, hey, this is all your fault. Figure it out. So that's the first thing. Secondly, these things you talk about are part of life, just like death is part of life, and just like war is part of peace. I mean, building, destruction, we come from a very privileged place. You could probably walk outside and not get shot in the head by a sniper, right? I'll bet money on that. But some places that they will shoot you in the head, right? Now, is it your job to solve that? No, it's like whatever they're doing there is what they've been doing for 2,000 years. And all I'm saying is that you can't deal with the world as if it's your responsibility to fix it. You have only one responsibility in life, and that's not to die. And then the second one is to conduct yourself as productively as you can until such time you die. So to absorb the evils of the world, that's just propaganda. That's just the shit that flows into your brain by reading the media, watching Twitter. Now, do you get hardened and say, yeah, whatever, I don't care. They shot that little baby in the head. Doesn't bother me. No, but you have to understand the complexities that go into those stories, and also the structure that puts certain things in front of your face and not other things in front of your face. I don't know what to call it, but it's we live in a silo, right? And 20 years ago, when I was growing up, I had one TV channel, so a TV was binary. It was either on or off. Didn't have a choice. What I wanted to watch is either you watch TV or you didn't watch TV. There was a newspaper, so either you read the newspaper or you didn't read the newspaper, right? And there were radio choices. You could listen to music, you could listen to news, whatever. But these things were not shaping your life. They were informative, but they were not shaping your life. They weren't in front of you all the time, right? So you had to read books. You had to go to the library, you had to go to the bookstore or whatever. And if you're interested in China or medieval Europe or whatever, you had to read a book. And if you read a lot of books, you were smart. And if you read a couple of books, you were sort of up to speed. And then when you actually go to these places, you suddenly go, why did I think that way? Like was because those books were written by Westerners for me, like, right? I had only one access point to understanding culture, and that was very singular, right? So I'm just saying that physical experience should be your guide to whether you should give a shit or not, right? If you want to go to Somalia and help people that are starving, then go there and then be worried about that. But you can't worry about people in China that are starving or people in Angola or America that are starving. You have to focus on that. So do what you can do and then be smart about what you do. And you don't have to worry about all the other stuff.
I've heard you once in an interview, somebody asked you why you don't wake up screaming, why you don't have PTSD, like a lot of other people who bear witness to war. And you said something to the effect of internally, you realize that all these sorts of negative things that you're seeing are, you know, endemic to every human being on an individual basis. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit, what you meant?
So PTSD is an interesting thing. It's got two phases. One is the immediate moment at which you're faced with a mind-fuckingly violent or shocking event. And then you've got the processing part of that. And some people process things many, many years, sometimes decades after that. I just watched a documentary about a film director, who watched a group of GIs repeatedly rape a young girl. He didn't say what age she was, on a train in Europe. They basically yanked this girl from the station and repeatedly raped her and then just deposited her after they were done. And he says his entire life that shaped him, because all his films were about justice and about equality and et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to think of the director's name in a second. But he did Network. He did one of the greatest films ever. And my point is that he was scarred by a singular event. Now, imagine being sent to Iraq, and your job is to kick in the door of a house. Inside there's a family of 13 or 14 or whatever. The young kid grabs a rifle, you shoot him in the head. The mother swings at you, you gun her down. Somebody comes from in a corner, you kill him, and you find out it's the wrong house, right? And you just murdered 3 people. And you do that every night, every week for 2 years, go home, come back, do it again. We set ourselves up into fighting wars that were PTSD inducing because they weren't morally correct. We were doing things that were disconnected from our own personal cognizance. So there's a lot of people that deal with doing bad things. There's a lot of people dealing with survivor's guilt, in which somebody says, hey, shit, bang, you just got shot. Had I said this person wouldn't be dead today. There's a lot of people that can't deal with emotional stimulation. It'd be just as simple as that. And there's a lot of people that were never really addressed what PTSD is and how it affects them. Because you're coming from a conflict area to a suburban lifestyle, right? And if you watch the movie The Deer Hunter, you need that decompression point. You can't just come straight from the front lines and expect to be normal, right? So I've always had a decompression period. Plus, I also deal with the things I see, and I've seen a lot of things, right? And I deal with them as being real, as being not like unimaginable, but they're right in front of me, and I film them too. So I don't have nightmares. I don't have those problems. But I tell people that when there's a fire, some people run into the building and some people run out of the building. And I think it's a good way to describe people that should be in the business of combat and adventure and people that shouldn't be in the business of combat and adventure. There's people that run ambulances. My God, the things they see on a daily, weekly basis.
Yeah.
Is like 100 times what people in warfare see. So I don't try to focus on it as a military thing. I think it's something that people get because they have a hard time compressing or accepting or processing violent events. And a lot of times these violent events were magnified and repeated so many times, they didn't even know what they were seeing and doing until later. So there's help for people like that. A lot of people use mushrooms. There's all kinds of therapy. Xanax, whatever, to reduce that. But a lot of it is just a heightened sense of like looking over your shoulder, wondering if something's going to happen. And IEDs can do that too, you know, bombs and like random things that make no sense. So there were a lot of random things, a lot of violence in the 20 years of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan alone. I mean, I've been to like 4 dozen wars, but I'm just saying those wars were particularly bad.
Your advice to young people. I've heard you mention this sometimes in some past interviews I've listened to you. But I wanted to maybe see if we could expand on some of that, you know, especially because you kind of mentioned there's that key
I'm using
element.
the term young people, you know, basically screw the world. I still feel I'm young. You know, I'm 69. I just turned 69 years old. And I get up every morning, like just loving what I do and wanting to do more and this and that. And so youth is really, we should be talking about inexperience, right? People that need experience, because I started when I was 40. I didn't start when I was 19 doing this. Well, I was a poor kid, right? So I lived in a car when I was 16, and I drove out to Toronto, and I called every ad agency in the phone book and got a few interviews. And one of the guys said, "Well, why don't you start in the mailroom?" So I started in the mailroom, got a job to get in the mailroom to get in the mailroom. But anyways, I started in the mailroom. And at age 17, the executive vice president said to me, "You know, the problem with you, Pelton, is you don't know shit. You don't know anything. I mean, you're writing ads for all these products and these customers, but he's like, you don't know anything." And he said that he started working when he was 19, he got married, he got kids, and he never had the time to live, right? And I took that as advice, you know. And he said, "Why don't you take a leave of absence, travel around the world? You can work at the other agencies, there's a network of agencies." I said, "Okay, sure." So I don't know if I got fired or whether it was a good idea, but I left because I wanted to travel around anyways. And I traveled around the world. I got bored, ended up in Australia working for this big production company, doing these multimedia film slide, you know, special effects shows. And out of guilt, I came back and said, "Okay, where's my job? Where's Bob Mobilia? Bob Mackler was the guy that I'd worked for." He said, "Well, Mackler's dead." "Oh, okay." So I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, after you left, he quit his job as executive vice president, went to Spain, bought a monkey, had a beret and an earring, and wrote poetry at like a cafe. He did that for a few months, and then he sold the monkey, you know, took off the beret, came home, reconciled with his family, and died of a heart attack." I'm like, holy shit, right? You know, so advice works both ways, right? In other words, I used to talk to him about my dreams. He used to talk to me about his dreams. And when I was working in advertising, I am a very aggressive person. I work very hard, very long. I'm very smart. I solve people's problems. I made people hundreds of millions of dollars, whether it's launching companies from scratch like Upper Deck, or whether it's working with Steve Jobs on the launch of the, you know, computers, Lisa.
Yeah.
I'm just a guy that you want at your side if you're launching a product or you're creating something, because I'm fearless, right? And I'm a very original thinker. I do a lot of research, and I used to take a month off. And when I got back from those month expeditions, I was very calm and quiet. You know, wasn't aggressive at all. I was, you know, I was just very zen-like. And I learned this from one of my other employees whose wife made him take a month off, and he was a chain smoking workaholic, you know. And when a bunch of my mentors died, one of my clients, my father, other people, I think I was in my early 40s. And I realized that, look, you only have one go at life. You only have one shot. And if you don't do the things that you really enjoy, that you really want to, you're not going to do them, because it's easy to get trapped in that Rolls Royce custom suit. I had a building with my name on it, you know, 10,000 square feet, and you get trapped in that. And you got to learn to pivot, right? And to be at the appropriate place in your life that you should be. So I decided, well, maybe I'll just brand myself. I'll be the guy I want to be. And I did not realize how fast it took off. Within a few months, ABC was doing a special on me. I was the first Sojo, you know, solo journalist.
Yeah. Solo journals.
I had a TV deal with Discovery. God knows how many people were writing about me. I mean, I was famous. My publisher, I had a book deal, you know, to write my autobiography. And my publisher said, this guy gets more hits than Madonna. And so I became sort of the fantasy. Now you got to remember, this is late 1990s, early 2000s, before 9/11, right? I became the guy that everybody wanted to be. You know, I was the Joe Rogan, whatever, idol of many, many young men, because I was just say, fuck it, I'm doing this, right? It's important. And I did it with style, and I documented everything, and I was funny. And I didn't see that, right? I only saw what I was doing, which is my dreams. The thing, I want to learn about this. I'm going to go there. I'm going to live with these people. And I don't think I saw the fearlessness of it. I mean, I think when I look back, you got to remember, I just went places. There was no such thing as an embed. There was no such thing as a visa. There was no like somebody writing me a check. You know, it's like I want to go meet this tribe, sit on top of this mountain. And oh, by the way, they said if you come, they're going to kill you. I was, oh, we'll see. We'll work that out when I
Is
get
that
there.
Algeria?
No, that was Bougainville. But
Oh, okay. Okay.
and I'm sitting on top of a mountain, you know, the only journalist in the world, and sitting with these beautiful people with flowers sitting at my knees and talking to a guy that promised to kill me like a month earlier, right? And then he realized, well, I was wrong, you know, blah, blah, blah. But the point is I was doing the shit that I don't know, maybe 18th century, you know, maybe what they did in the 17th and 18th century, where you just
Yeah.
went, you did it. And I survived. I made friends. I documented it. I didn't bullshit. I didn't exaggerate. And people were just like, whoa, you know, like this guy is doing stuff that I don't even know what it is, right? So that became sort of like a safety thing, right? World's Most Dangerous Places is really about how to stay alive and safe. And I changed a lot of people's lives by them saying, well, you know, I thought everybody's telling me I should be an accountant, but you know, maybe I'll join special forces. I can't tell you how many emails I get from people saying, you gave me the bravery, right? You gave me the self-confidence in myself to do the thing I wanted to do. And I don't dictate, you know, I'm not saying you got to be like this or do that. I'm just saying that, God, life is so short, right? Life is so precious, and you know, balance, extremism, well, you know, whatever, however you want to run it, just do it. So anyway, bottom line is I became that thing, right? And then I don't think it was a paradigm shift. I think I was always that person. I was just sort of, I didn't have to run a company, which is like a pain in the ass, right? You know, I deal with monetizing and all that kind of stuff, and you have to deal with the entertainment world and whatever. And you know, it's funny, when I went to Iraq in 2003, my special forces friends were there before the war saying, come on, man, come on and hang out. I had a renewal contract for my TV series. I had an 8-show, no-cut contract. I had a celebrity endorsement fee. And I thought, no, I don't want to be the guy playing the guy. You know, I just want to do my thing. And so I left it on the kitchen table, and I disappeared into Iraq for 6 months.
In a red Bentley, right?
Huh?
It was a red
Oh,
sports
yeah,
car.
one of the things I did is I bought a Bentley and did or drive around the country logging mass graves, but I was doing whatever I wanted to do, right? And that's my point. And when I got back, I started doing ground networks, which was hiring people in all these war zones to, like locals, to provide a daily flow of what's going on. And, you know, I made money doing that. I reinvented journalism, you know, and people were reading it going like, how does this guy run a news network inside Iraq, inside Afghanistan, inside Somalia, you know, tracking pirates? Like, here's the pirate's phone number. Like, how do you do that? Like in journalism? And it's like, you just do it, right? So I was able to reinvent journalism in a way that was both profitable and also interesting. And now I think I focus on the big stories, which take time, right? If I called up the New York Times and said, okay, I'm doing this, I'll need a couple of $1 million, they'd like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Mm.
Again, it's not that I'm going up against media. I'm just saying that the world is not structured to support adventure. It's quite the opposite. And this is the sad thing, right? If you want to like skydive or climb a mountain, yeah, there's people that'll give you, you know, $5,000 or something like that. But in terms of real adventure, where you go into really fucking dangerous places and you meet with really fucking dangerous people and you try to understand what they're doing and hopefully provide a counterweight to what you see in the media, which is very much not what I do. I don't know if that exists anymore, you know, and I sure wish it did exist, because the internet is the perfect vehicle for it, right? in a perfect world, Elon Musk would set up a $1 billion trust fund for people that want to go out and tell stories that aren't being told, right? And I don't mean the namby-pamby, NGO sponsored ones. I mean, like people that in Burma that are fighting a war that nobody, people will go there and cover it if they get access, but it's just a lot of stories that aren't being told. I talked to my grandson, who's like 14, he's 15, 16 now. And I said, hey, I'm going to do a thing called the world's most dangerous places. Would you like to ever go to a dangerous place like a war zone? He said, no, why? I said, because it's dangerous. And I'm like, hey, but how do I convince that 16-year-old that there's little old ladies living there? And I said to him, well, you live in a dangerous place. You're at the age where you're most likely to die in a car accident, fentanyl overdose. I mean, you're living La Vida Loca and you don't even know it, right? It's like, and he's like, what? And I thought, oh my God, he has no fucking clue of the dangers around him, right? Both mentally and physically, sexually. And I'm like, fuck, this is what my book did. This is what my book did. My book said, oh, you're doing just fine sitting, at home, going to college. Well, let me tell you what's going to kill you. And you're like, I'm going to die of heart disease, aren't I? And I'm going to probably slip in the tub. I'm more likely to get killed by a mosquito than a terrorist. Like, why am I afraid of these things, right? What is the thing? And the financial thing you're talking about, why am I so afraid of the financial aspects of this? Well, I didn't realize that when I lived in a car and I picked fruit, I didn't have any money. I had like a pink Rambler as my house, and I had to go find a sign that said help wanted. And I had to go work there for a week to get enough money to eat, peanut butter and bread sandwiches. And I didn't really think about money being an obstacle to do anything, right? And again, I'm not helping anybody by telling like, when I was a kid, I did that. But the fears that we have, that's my point. You
Yeah.
write down all the fears you have and you go, okay, let's find a guy who's not afraid of this. I'm gonna go down and talk to a Somali guy who came all the way from Somalia to your hometown. And how did you do that? Like, you traveled halfway around the world and you had people try to kill you, rape you, drown you, whatever. How did you do that? And you realize those are the adventurers. Those are the people that are doing what you want to do, except they don't make them heroes, right? They don't put them on chat shows and give them contracts. So I guess what I'm saying is this. Nothing is new. Nobody's doing something that you couldn't do tomorrow. You've got reasons not to do it. That's great. And if you're looking for reasons not to do something, I'll send you a whole list, right? And you won't do that thing. But if you're looking to do something, you just fucking do it, right? And you deal with the consequences. Sometimes you end up in prison. Sometimes you end up sick. Sometimes you end up like sitting going, why am I doing this? I don't like doing this, right? But the adventurous spirit is the thing that is inside you as a boy that turns you into a man. It's harnessing that into a functional way of survival, right? And this is what I'm saying is that if I sit my grandson down and I say, okay, you don't want to go there because it's dangerous, but what if danger comes to you? What if you're in a house that's on fire? You're going to run in or you're going to run out, right? A lot of the running in comes from not fearing things, understanding things, and maybe even practicing and slowly working up to that thing. Whereas the running out does not solve the fire in the house, right? So that's the lesson is to teach yourself how to overcome those fears and look at people that are doing the things you want to and say, well, you didn't have any money, did you? Like, no, you didn't have a contract with a media. No, I didn't. You didn't have a sponsor or no, I didn't. It's like, what the fuck? And I'm like, well, why do you think I did? Why do you think adventure comes with a laundry list and a checklist and a little credit card with a bank statement? No, that's not adventure.